I'm Sarah, and I'm 29 years old. For most of my life, I believed my family loved me equally. I believed that when they said family comes first, they meant all of us. I believed that my achievements mattered to them, that my milestones were worth celebrating, and that I held the same place in their hearts as my sister Emma. But sometimes the people closest to us can hide the most devastating truths, and sometimes it takes one moment of crystal-clear cruelty to see patterns that have been destroying you for years. What happened when my family flew to Europe for my sister's graduation while completely ignoring mine wasn't just about a missed ceremony. It was about discovering that I had been systematically erased from my own family's priorities for decades, and that they had been actively working to ensure I never realized my own worth. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy dismissing me, I was building something they never saw coming. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered why your achievements never seem to matter as much as someone else's, or if you've ever discovered that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had conditions you never knew existed, this story is for you. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll understand why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to earn love from people who decided long ago that you weren't worth it. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start with my graduation. It starts with a family dynamic that I spent 29 years trying to understand, and another year learning to heal from. Growing up, Emma and I were only 2 years apart. She was the golden child, beautiful, outgoing, effortlessly charming. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who preferred books to parties and earned straight A's while she scraped by with C's. My parents always said they loved us equally, but love and attention are different things, and Emma got most of both. When Emma wanted to quit piano lessons after 3 months, my parents immediately found her a dance teacher instead. When I wanted to quit piano after 4 years of dedicated practice, my parents insisted I was just going through a phase and made me continue for 2 more years. When Emma decided she wanted to try horseback riding, my parents found the money for expensive lessons at a prestigious stable. When I asked to join the robotics club, my parents said the fees were too high and suggested I find a cheaper hobby instead. I learned early that Emma's interests were investments, while mine were expenses. Emma's dreams were family dreams, while mine were personal indulgences. Emma's failures were learning experiences, while mine were disappointments. But I was young, and I loved my family, so I told myself that every family has different dynamics, and maybe I just needed to try harder to earn the same level of support. The pattern became more obvious during high school. Emma struggled with her grades, so my parents hired her a tutor for $400 a month. I maintained a 4.0 GPA entirely on my own, and my parents told me they were proud, but suggested I shouldn't get too focused on academics at the expense of social skills. When Emma got into a decent state university, my parents threw her a celebration party with 30 guests and a custom cake. When I got into MIT with a full scholarship, my parents took me to dinner at Applebee's and told me they hoped I wouldn't let success go to my head. Even then, I convinced myself that maybe my parents were just trying to keep me humble. Maybe they were worried about me becoming arrogant or losing touch with my family. Maybe their restraint was actually a form of love, protecting me from becoming spoiled or entitled. College was when the differential treatment became impossible to ignore. Emma's tuition, room, and board came to $45,000 a year, all covered by our parents. She called home 3 times a week, and every conversation was met with enthusiasm and genuine interest in her social life, her classes, and her future plans. My parents visited her campus twice a semester, bringing care packages and taking her out for expensive dinners. Meanwhile, I was at MIT on a full academic scholarship, but I still needed money for textbooks, lab fees, and living expenses. My parents sent me $200 a month, which they frequently mentioned as a sacrifice they were making. They visited my campus once in 4 years, and during that visit, they spent most of the time talking about how impressed they were with Emma's recent internship at a marketing firm. The phone calls with my parents became increasingly one-sided. They would ask me basic questions about my classes, listen to my answers with obvious distraction, and then spend 20 minutes updating me on Emma's latest adventures. When I tried to share my excitement about being selected for a prestigious research program, my mother would respond with something like, "That's nice, honey. And did you hear that Emma might be selected for her sorority's leadership committee?" I started to notice that my achievements were consistently minimized or redirected. When I published my first academic paper as an undergraduate, my parents' response was that it was good to have hobbies. When I was accepted into a competitive graduate program, they expressed concern about me spending too much time in school instead of finding a nice young man to settle down with. When I won a national award for my research, they forwarded the news to relatives with a note about how proud they were of both their daughters, then spent the rest of the email detailing Emma's recent promotion to assistant manager at her retail job. The financial disparity became even more stark during graduate school. Emma moved back home after college and lived rent-free for 2 years, while working part-time and dating various men our parents adored. During this time, my parents paid for Emma's car insurance, health insurance, cell phone, and gave her a monthly allowance of $800 for personal expenses. They also paid for her to take a European vacation with her friends, covering the $3,000 cost because they said she needed to experience the world before settling down. I, meanwhile, was living on a graduate student stipend of $1,800 a month, struggling to pay rent in an expensive city while pursuing my PhD. When I asked my parents if they could help with my health insurance premium, they said they were proud of my independence, but money was tight. When I mentioned that I was eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights, they suggested I learn to budget better and maybe find a part-time job. The most painful part wasn't even the money, it was the emotional investment. My parents knew every detail of Emma's life, every friend she dated, every workplace drama, every mood swing. They worried about her constantly, called her daily, and made her problems their problems. With me, they maintained polite distance. They asked generic questions and gave generic responses. They treated my life like a pleasant but unremarkable television show, something they could tune into occasionally but never felt compelled to follow closely. I started documenting these patterns during my final year of graduate school, not because I was planning to confront anyone, but because I was beginning to question my own perception of reality. Was I being too sensitive? Was I imagining the disparity? Was I somehow responsible for receiving less attention and support? But the documentation was revealing. In 1 year, my parents visited Emma 6 times, taking her on weekend trips and family vacations. They visited me 0 times, despite my campus being only 4 hours away. They spent over $12,000 on Emma's expenses, including her car payment, insurance, and entertainment fund. They sent me exactly $2,400 total, which they reminded me was a generous gift that many graduate students don't receive. When I tried to address this disparity in gentle conversations, my parents became defensive. They insisted that they loved us equally, but that we had different needs. Emma was more social and needed more support navigating relationships. I was more independent and capable of handling things on my own. Emma was going through a difficult adjustment period after college. I was thriving in my academic environment and didn't need as much attention. Every explanation made logical sense individually, but together they created a clear picture. Emma was treated like a beloved daughter whose every need was anticipated and met, while I was treated like a distant relative whose basic well-being was occasionally acknowledged but never prioritized. The pattern became most obvious during major life events. When Emma got engaged to her college boyfriend, my parents immediately started planning and financing her wedding. They set aside $25,000 for the celebration, spent months researching venues, and turned wedding planning into a full-time family project. My mother called me weekly with updates about flower arrangements and catering choices, asking for my input on decisions that had clearly already been made. When I started my doctoral dissertation, my parents' response was a polite congratulations and a suggestion that I make sure to take care of my health during the stressful time. When I finished my comprehensive exams, passing with distinction, my parents sent a card. When Emma passed her real estate license exam on the 3rd try, my parents threw her a celebration dinner and bought her a new laptop for her business. The most devastating realization came when I understood that my parents weren't just passively favoring Emma, they were actively working to maintain the dynamic. They would share Emma's good news with extended family and friends, but they rarely mentioned my achievements unless directly asked. They would invite Emma to family events and assume I was too busy with school to attend. They would plan vacations around Emma's schedule and inform me about them afterward. I started to see that my role in the family was to be the low-maintenance daughter who succeeded quietly while never requiring emotional or financial investment. Emma was the family project, the daughter whose happiness was a family responsibility. I was the family afterthought, the daughter whose happiness was my own responsibility. This dynamic reached its breaking point during the spring of my final year in graduate school. I was months away from defending my doctoral dissertation, a 5-year research project that would culminate in earning my PhD in biomedical engineering. This was the most significant academic achievement of my life, representing years of struggle, sacrifice, and unprecedented dedication to my field. At the same time, Emma was finishing her master's degree in marketing, a program she had started part-time while working full-time at her real estate job. She had taken 3 years to complete what was designed as a 2-year program, and she had struggled with several courses, requiring tutoring that my parents paid for. The timing was almost poetic in its cruelty. Emma's graduation was scheduled for May 15th at a university in London, where she had spent her final semester in a study abroad program that my parents had funded. My dissertation defense was scheduled for May 18th, followed by my graduation ceremony on May 22nd. When my parents announced their plans, I initially assumed they would attend both ceremonies. Emma's graduation was important, but my PhD defense represented the culmination of nearly a decade of academic work. Surely they would find a way to celebrate both daughters' achievements. Instead, my parents informed me that they were planning a 10-day European vacation around Emma's graduation. They would arrive in London on May 12th, attend her ceremony on May 15th, and then tour Scotland and Ireland before returning home on May 22nd. They had already booked flights, hotels, and rental cars. They had already requested time off work. They had already started planning which restaurants to visit and which sights to see. When I asked about my dissertation defense, my parents said they were sorry about the timing, but they had already committed to the European trip. They suggested that I could schedule my defense for a different date, or that they could try to attend virtually if the university offered that option. When I explained that doctoral dissertation defenses cannot be rescheduled for family convenience, and that virtual attendance wasn't possible, my parents said they understood, but hoped I would understand that they had already made significant financial investments in the European trip. The cost of this European vacation was staggering. My parents spent over $8,000 on flights, accommodation, and expenses for their 10-day trip. They had never spent more than $500 to visit me during my entire academic career. They had never taken time off work for any of my achievements. They had never planned a vacation around my schedule or my needs. But the financial disparity was nothing compared to the emotional message. My parents were telling me that Emma's graduation was worth international travel, significant expense, and careful planning, while my PhD defense was worth a virtual appearance if convenient. Emma's achievement was worth 10 days of celebration, while mine was worth hoping I would understand their priorities. When I tried to express how hurt I was by this decision, my parents became defensive and accusatory. They said I was being selfish and trying to make Emma's special moment about me. They said I was old enough to understand that they couldn't be in 2 places at once. They said they had already made their decision, and I needed to respect it. The gaslighting was subtle but devastating. They framed my reasonable desire to have my family present for the most important moment of my academic career as selfishness. They reframed their choice to prioritize Emma's graduation as an unavoidable conflict rather than a clear statement of their values. They made me feel guilty for wanting what Emma had always received without question: family support during major life events. I defended my dissertation on May 18th to a room full of professors, colleagues, and friends, but no family. I passed with distinction, earning unanimous approval from my committee and receiving praise for research that would later be published in 3 peer-reviewed journals. I celebrated that night with my advisor and lab mates, trying to ignore the empty chairs where my parents should have been sitting. My graduation ceremony on May 22nd was equally lonely. I walked across the stage to receive my PhD in biomedical engineering, knowing that my parents were somewhere in Ireland, posting pictures of scenic landscapes on social media. I had earned the highest academic degree possible in my field, but I celebrated alone because my family was busy celebrating Emma's considerably less demanding achievement. The social media posts from their European vacation were the cruelest part. My parents posted daily updates about their adventures, always featuring Emma as the star of the show. Photos of Emma at her graduation ceremony, Emma at fancy restaurants, Emma at tourist attractions, Emma laughing with my parents against beautiful backdrops. The captions were effusive about how proud they were of Emma's academic achievement and how wonderful it was to celebrate together as a family. My graduation received a single social media post, a generic congratulations message posted 3 days after the ceremony, with no photos and no mention of my specific achievement. The post simply said that they were proud of both their daughters' recent graduations, as if Emma's marketing degree and my PhD in biomedical engineering were equivalent accomplishments requiring equivalent recognition. The aftermath was even more painful than the event itself. When my parents returned from Europe, they called to ask about my graduation ceremony. They wanted to know if it was nice, if I had enjoyed the experience, and if I had taken any good photos. They spoke to me the way you might speak to a distant acquaintance about a mildly interesting event, polite, superficial, and completely disconnected from the emotional significance of the moment. When I tried to explain how hurt I was by their absence, my parents became defensive and manipulative. They said they had already apologized for the timing conflict. They said they had tried to make it work but couldn't be in 2 places at once. They said they hoped I could understand that they had to make difficult choices sometimes, but there had been no difficult choice. There had been a clear priority decision. Emma's graduation was worth international travel, significant expense, and 10 days of family celebration. My PhD, defense, and graduation were worth virtual attendance if convenient, and a social media post if remembered. The pattern continued even after graduation. When Emma got married 6 months later, my parents spent months planning and financing the elaborate celebration. They hired a wedding planner, booked a luxury venue, and invited 200 guests. They spent over $30,000 on the wedding, including Emma's dress, flowers, photography, and honeymoon. They gave speeches about how proud they were of Emma and how excited they were to welcome her husband into the family. When I started my postdoctoral research position at a prestigious medical research institute, my parents' response was a brief phone call congratulating me on the new job and asking if I was settling in well. They didn't ask about my research, my colleagues, or my future plans. They didn't offer to visit or help with moving expenses. They treated my professional achievement like a routine job change rather than a significant career milestone. The disparity became even more obvious during family gatherings. Extended family members would ask about both daughters, and my parents would spend 10 minutes detailing Emma's life, her marriage, her house, her job, her vacation plans, her future goals. When they mentioned me, it was always brief and generic. Sarah is doing well with her research work. She's very busy with her studies. She's always been the academic one in the family. I realized that my parents had created 2 completely different narratives about their daughters. Emma was the family success story, the daughter whose life was interesting and worth discussing. I was the family footnote, the daughter whose achievements were mentioned out of politeness but never explored in detail. The most devastating realization came when I understood that this dynamic was intentional. My parents weren't accidentally favoring Emma. They were actively maintaining a system where she received primary attention and support, while I received secondary consideration. They had trained our extended family, friends, and even Emma herself to see this disparity as normal and natural. Emma had learned to expect unconditional family support for her goals, while I had learned to expect conditional acknowledgement of my achievements. Emma had learned that her happiness was a family responsibility, while I had learned that my happiness was my own responsibility. Emma had learned that her problems were family problems, while I had learned that my problems were personal challenges. This training had been so thorough that even I had internalized it. I had spent years making excuses for my parents' behavior, convincing myself that I was too sensitive or demanding too much. I had told myself that I was naturally more independent and needed less support. I had accepted that Emma's achievements were more celebration-worthy because they were more relatable or accessible. But the truth was simpler and more painful. My parents had decided that Emma was worth more of their emotional and financial investment than I was. They had decided that her happiness mattered more than mine, that her achievements were more important than mine, and that her presence in the family was more valuable than mine. The breaking point came during Christmas of that year. Emma announced that she was pregnant, and my parents immediately shifted into grandparent mode. They started planning nursery decorations, researching baby products, and discussing how they would provide childcare support. They talked about taking early retirement so they could spend more time with their first grandchild. That same Christmas, I announced that I had been offered a tenure-track position at a top-tier university, a career achievement that most people in my field spend decades working toward. The position came with a significant salary increase, research funding, and the opportunity to establish my own laboratory. It was the culmination of 15 years of academic work and represented financial security and professional recognition beyond anything I had previously achieved. My parents' response was polite congratulations, followed by 45 minutes of discussion about baby names and nursery themes. They asked me no questions about my new position, showed no interest in my research, and made no effort to understand the significance of the achievement. They were too busy planning their roles as grandparents to acknowledge that their other daughter had just achieved something extraordinary. This was the moment I finally understood that I would never be a priority in my family. I would never receive the same level of attention, support, or celebration that Emma received automatically. I would never be seen as equally valuable or worthy of investment. I would always be the secondary daughter, the family afterthought, the daughter whose achievements were mentioned but never celebrated. But this realization came with an unexpected gift: clarity. For the first time in my life, I stopped trying to earn my parents' approval and started focusing on my own self-worth. I stopped making excuses for their behavior and started setting boundaries to protect my emotional well-being. I also started sharing my experiences with friends and colleagues, and I discovered that I was not alone. Many successful women had similar stories of family favoritism, where their achievements were minimized while their siblings received disproportionate attention and support. Many had learned to excel despite lack of family support, developing extraordinary resilience and self-reliance in the process. The vindication came gradually, but it came powerfully. My research started gaining national attention, leading to speaking engagements at major conferences and collaboration opportunities with leading scientists in my field. My work was featured in prominent scientific journals and mainstream media outlets. I received grants worth hundreds of thousands of dollars and was invited to serve on prestigious academic committees. Meanwhile, Emma's life settled into a comfortable but unremarkable routine. She worked part-time at a local marketing firm, focused primarily on raising her children, and relied heavily on my parents for emotional and financial support. There was nothing wrong with her choices, but there was also nothing particularly noteworthy about her achievements. The contrast became impossible to ignore when I was invited to speak at a major medical conference in our hometown. The event was covered by local media, and several articles mentioned my research and its potential impact on treating genetic diseases. My parents' friends and colleagues started asking them about their daughter, the scientist, expressing amazement at my professional accomplishments. Suddenly, my parents began mentioning my career in social situations. They started sharing articles about my research on social media. They started asking me questions about my work when they called. They started bragging about their daughter, the PhD, to anyone who would listen. But this newfound attention felt hollow and manipulative. My parents were proud of me now because my achievements reflected well on them, not because they had finally recognized my worth as a person. They were interested in my career because it gave them social status, not because they had developed genuine curiosity about my life and goals. The manipulation became obvious when my parents started suggesting that I move back to our hometown to be closer to family. They mentioned job openings at local universities and research institutions, positions that would represent significant career downgrades, but would allow them to brag about their daughter, the professor, to their friends. They framed these suggestions as concern for my well-being and desire to see me settle down, but I recognized them as attempts to control my narrative and claim credit for my success. I also noticed that my parents started treating me differently during family gatherings. They would bring up my career achievements in front of extended family, positioning themselves as the proud parents who had always supported my academic goals. They would make comments about how they had always known I was destined for greatness, how they had encouraged my intellectual curiosity from a young age, how they had sacrificed to support my education. These revisionist narratives were particularly painful because they directly contradicted my lived experience. My parents had not supported my academic goals. They had consistently minimized and dismissed them. They had not encouraged my intellectual curiosity. They had suggested I focus on social skills instead. They had not sacrificed to support my education. They had provided minimal financial support while spending lavishly on Emma's less demanding pursuits. But the most revealing moment came when my parents suggested that I contribute financially to Emma's second child's education fund. They framed this as a family responsibility, suggesting that my success created obligations to support other family members. They mentioned that I was now in a position to help, that family members should support each other, and that Emma had always been there for me when I needed her. This request was particularly manipulative because it revealed my parents' true perception of our family dynamic. They saw my success as a family resource that should be shared with Emma, but they had never seen Emma's extensive family support as a resource that should be shared with me. They expected me to contribute to Emma's children's future because I was now financially capable, but they had never expected Emma to contribute to my education or career despite their significant investment in her comfort and well-being. The hypocrisy was stunning. My parents had spent decades investing in Emma's happiness and success while providing minimal support for my goals. Now that I had achieved success despite their lack of support, they wanted me to share that success with the daughter they had always prioritized. They wanted me to become a resource for Emma's family while continuing to receive secondary consideration for my own needs and goals. This was when I finally understood that my parents would never see me as an equal family member. I would always be expected to give more than I received, to support others without expecting support in return, to celebrate Emma's achievements while having my own achievements minimized or ignored. I would always be the family resource rather than the family priority. The decision to set boundaries was not easy, but it was necessary. I started by limiting my availability for family events that centered around Emma's needs while ignoring my own. I stopped contributing to group gifts for Emma's children, while my own career milestones went unacknowledged. I began declining requests for financial support, while my parents continued to provide extensive support for Emma's family. Most importantly, I started building relationships with people who valued my worth as a person rather than as a resource. I cultivated friendships with colleagues who celebrated my achievements genuinely. I joined professional organizations where my contributions were recognized and appreciated. I created a chosen family of people who saw me as a priority rather than an afterthought. The transformation was remarkable. Once I stopped trying to earn my parents' approval, I started receiving recognition and appreciation from people who actually valued my contributions. My research continued to gain prominence, leading to job offers from prestigious institutions and invitations to collaborate with leading scientists worldwide. My professional network expanded to include mentors and peers who celebrated my success and supported my goals. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents became more honest but more distant. They continued to prioritize Emma's needs and celebrate her achievements, but they also continued to expect me to be available when they needed support or wanted to claim credit for my success. They wanted the social status that came with having a successful daughter, but they didn't want to invest in the emotional relationship that typically creates that success. I learned to accept this dynamic without trying to change it. My parents had shown me who they were through decades of consistent behavior, and I finally believed them. They were people who valued Emma more than me, who saw her happiness as more important than mine, and who expected me to accept this disparity without complaint. But I also learned that their opinion of my worth was not the ultimate truth about my value as a person. I was worthy of love, support, and celebration, regardless of my parents' ability to provide those things. I was successful, intelligent, and valuable regardless of my family's recognition of those qualities. I was complete and whole regardless of their approval or disapproval. The final vindication came when I was offered a department chair position at a prestigious university, making me one of the youngest people ever to hold such a position in my field. The appointment came with a substantial salary increase, research funding, and the opportunity to shape the next generation of scientists. It represented not just professional success, but the kind of leadership role that influences entire fields of study. My parents' response was predictable. They were proud and excited to share the news with their friends, but they also immediately started suggesting ways I could use my position to benefit Emma's family. They wondered if I could help Emma's husband find a job at the university. They asked if I could provide internship opportunities for Emma's children someday. They treated my professional achievement as a family resource rather than a personal accomplishment. But this time, their response didn't hurt me. I had learned to see their behavior as information about their character rather than evidence of my worth. They were people who saw me as a resource rather than a daughter, and that said everything about them and nothing about me. I celebrated my appointment with friends and colleagues who understood its significance. I used my position to mentor young scientists who reminded me of my younger self, brilliant, hardworking, and undervalued by the people who should have supported them most. I created the kind of supportive environment I had always craved but had never received from my family. The healing process took time and professional support. I worked with a therapist who helped me understand that family favoritism is a form of emotional abuse that can have lasting effects on self-worth and relationship patterns. I learned that my parents' behavior was not normal or acceptable, despite their efforts to frame it as natural family dynamics. I also learned that I was not responsible for fixing my family's dysfunction. I could not force my parents to love me equally or treat me fairly. I could not change Emma's willingness to accept disproportionate support while remaining oblivious to my exclusion. I could not heal relationships that were fundamentally based on inequality and manipulation. What I could do was protect my own emotional well-being by setting clear boundaries and maintaining realistic expectations. I could choose to invest my energy in relationships that were mutually supportive and genuinely caring. I could create a life where my worth was recognized and celebrated, even if that recognition came from people outside my biological family. The most difficult part of this journey was accepting that my parents would never acknowledge the pain they had caused or the damage they had done. They would never apologize for missing my graduation while celebrating Emma's. They would never recognize the years of differential treatment or the emotional impact of their favoritism. They would never understand that their behavior had been harmful because they had never seen me as deserving equal treatment. But I also learned that I didn't need their acknowledgement to heal. I didn't need their apology to forgive them for my own peace of mind. I didn't need their recognition to know that I was worthy of love and support. I could heal from their damage without their participation in the healing process. Today, I maintain a cordial but limited relationship with my parents. I attend major family events, but I don't invest emotionally in their approval or disapproval. I share basic information about my life, but I don't seek their advice or support. I treat them the way they taught me to treat family members, with polite distance and minimal expectations. Emma and I have also developed a more honest relationship. She eventually recognized the disparity in our treatment, though she never fully acknowledged her role in perpetuating it. She expressed some regret about the way things had worked out, but she also made it clear that she wasn't willing to challenge our parents' favoritism or advocate for more equitable treatment. This was perhaps the most disappointing realization of all. Emma had benefited from our parents' favoritism for decades, and she was comfortable maintaining that dynamic even after recognizing its harmful effects on our relationship. She wanted to be forgiven for her passive participation in my exclusion, but she wasn't willing to actively work toward creating a more balanced family dynamic. I learned to accept this limitation as well. Emma was not the sister I had hoped for, just as my parents were not the parents I had hoped for. She was someone who had been trained to accept preferential treatment as normal and natural, and she was not motivated to change a system that benefited her. But I also learned that I could create the kind of family relationships I had always wanted with people who were not related to me by blood. I could have sisters who celebrated my achievements and supported my goals. I could have parental figures who invested in my happiness and took pride in my success. I could have family members who saw me as a priority rather than an afterthought. The chosen family I created includes mentors who guided my career development, colleagues who became lifelong friends, and younger scientists who now see me as a role model and supporter. These relationships are based on mutual respect, genuine care, and shared values rather than biological obligation and social expectation. These people celebrated my professional achievements because they understood their significance. They supported me during difficult times because they cared about my well-being. They invested in my success because they valued my contributions to their lives and to our shared community. The contrast between my chosen family and my biological family became especially clear during my recent book launch. I had written a book about my research and its implications for treating genetic diseases, and it was being published by a major academic press. This was a significant professional achievement that would reach audiences beyond my immediate field. My chosen family organized a launch party that celebrated both the book and the research it represented. They understood the years of work that had gone into the project, the significance of the publisher's interest, and the potential impact of the ideas I was sharing. They created an event that honored my achievement and acknowledged the hard work that had made it possible. My biological family's response was typically lukewarm. My parents bought a copy of the book and posted a brief social media announcement about their daughter's publication. They made no effort to understand the content or significance of the work. They treated it as a nice accomplishment that deserved polite recognition, but not genuine celebration. Emma's response was even more revealing. She congratulated me on the book, but immediately started talking about her own recent accomplishments: a promotion at work, a new house, her children's achievements in school. She couldn't allow my moment of recognition to exist without redirecting attention to her own life and goals. This pattern had become so familiar that it no longer surprised or hurt me. My biological family had shown me through decades of consistent behavior that they were not capable of celebrating my success without minimizing it or redirecting attention elsewhere. They were not capable of investing in my happiness without expecting something in return. They were not capable of seeing me as equally valuable or worthy of support. But I had also learned that their limitations were not my limitations. I could celebrate my own achievements. I could invest in my own happiness. I could recognize my own worth. I could create relationships where my value was acknowledged and appreciated. The most powerful realization was that I had succeeded not because of my family's support, but despite their lack of support. I had earned my PhD while receiving minimal encouragement. I had built my career while receiving little recognition. I had achieved professional success while being consistently treated as a secondary priority. This meant that my success was entirely my own. I had not been given advantages or special treatment. I had not been supported through difficult times or celebrated during achievements. I had created my own opportunities and overcome my own obstacles. I had built a life that reflected my values and goals rather than my family's expectations or limitations. The vindication was not that my family finally recognized my worth. It was that I had learned to recognize my own worth regardless of their recognition. I had learned to celebrate my own achievements regardless of their celebration. I had learned to invest in my own happiness regardless of their investment. I had also learned to use my experience to help others who were struggling with similar family dynamics. I mentored young scientists who had been dismissed or undervalued by their families. I spoke openly about the impact of family favoritism on professional development and personal well-being. I created opportunities for people who had been overlooked or ignored by the systems that should have supported them. This work became as meaningful as my scientific research because it addressed a different kind of problem: the problem of talented people who had been trained to undervalue themselves by the people who should have loved them most. I could help these people recognize their own worth and create supportive relationships that honored their contributions and celebrated their achievements. The transformation from invisible daughter to empowered scientist and mentor was not easy, but it was necessary. I had learned that I could not change my family's behavior, but I could change my response to their behavior. I could not force them to love me equally, but I could learn to love myself fully. I could not make them prioritize my happiness, but I could make my own happiness a priority. Today, I am genuinely proud of the life I have built. I have a career that makes meaningful contributions to scientific knowledge and human health. I have relationships that are based on mutual respect and genuine care. I have a sense of self-worth that is grounded in my own achievements rather than other people's approval. I have learned that family is not just about blood relations. It's about people who invest in your happiness, celebrate your achievements, and support your goals. I have learned that love is not just about feeling. It's about action, consistency, and mutual respect. I have learned that worth is not determined by other people's recognition. It's determined by your own values and contributions. If you are struggling with family favoritism, if you feel invisible in your own family, if you have been taught that your achievements don't matter as much as someone else's, I want you to know that you are not alone. Your experience is valid, your feelings are justified, and your worth is not determined by your family's ability to recognize it. You have the power to create relationships that honor your value. You have the right to expect equal treatment and genuine support. You have the ability to build a life that reflects your worth rather than other people's limitations. The journey from invisible to empowered is not easy, but it is possible. It requires courage to set boundaries, wisdom to recognize your own worth, and persistence to create the relationships you deserve. But it is worth every difficult step because it leads to a life where you are valued, celebrated, and loved for who you are, rather than what you can provide. Your family's inability to see your worth says nothing about your value and everything about their limitations. You are worthy of love, support, and celebration regardless of their recognition. You are capable of amazing things regardless of their investment. You are valuable regardless of their acknowledgement. I hope my story helps you understand that you are not responsible for fixing other people's inability to love you properly. You are only responsible for learning to love yourself fully and creating relationships that honor your worth. You deserve nothing less than genuine love, consistent support, and equal treatment. If you have similar experiences with family favoritism or being overlooked by the people who should have supported you most, please share your story in the comments. Let's create a community where everyone's worth is recognized and celebrated, where achievements are honored regardless of family support, and where healing is possible even when acknowledgement is not. Remember that your worth is not determined by your family's treatment of you. You are valuable, deserving, and capable of creating the life you want. You are not alone in this journey, and you are stronger than you know. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more content about healing from family dysfunction and creating healthy relationships. Your support helps me continue sharing stories that validate experiences and offer hope for healing. You are worthy of love, support, and celebration. Never forget that truth, no matter what your family's behavior might suggest. You are enough exactly as you are, and you deserve relationships that reflect that truth.